Hello and welcome back to the Quantum Mystic Podcast. I am Jane Bear and I'm here with my lovely and amazing co host, Lisa Campion. And we are here live to talk about a topic jealousy, envy, and comparison. And I feel like there are certain emotions that we don't really like to admit that we feel. And I don't know, jealousy is one of them, envy is another. We sort of tend to hide them, spiritualize past them, or judge ourselves for having them at all. But really, underneath that discomfort, these emotions are pointing to something. And I don't think that they really arrive randomly. They they're there to show us exactly where we've started measuring our own value through someone else's life. And I think comparison is more than a mental habit. It's sort of a moment where our attention leaves our own center and we reach outward for confirmation. And, from a somatic lens, our body feels that immediately. There's contraction and urgency and self doubt. And it's not because we're failing at anything, but honestly, because we've stepped out of relationship with ourselves. So, today we're going to talk about how to not get rid of jealousy or envy, but to understand what they're really pointing towards. Because every time comparison appears, it's highlighting a place where our own voice or direction or desire is really asking to be reclaimed. So instead of treating these emotions as something to fix, we're going to treat them sort of as guidance, as opportunities, as signals that bring us back to our own self, our own grounding, our own center, our own timing, and our own path. So let's begin to look at these. Lisa, how are you? What do you think about this topic?
I think it's such a great topic. And I also just want to reach out to everyone that's listening and say we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line in the comment section about who you are, where you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you. Just makes these conversations so rich when you guys join the conversation. So I was thinking a lot about this, Jane, and was really grateful for the chance to talk about it. And I think for me, like I had to kind of go down a rabbit hole. You went down one rabbit hole we're going to talk about. I went down another one. And my rabbit hole was like, I was like, what's the difference between jealousy and envy? Because I think we kind of use those words interchangeably. But I think there's like a variation energetically on them that's really worth talking about to make a distinction there. And I don't know, you can tell me if you agree with this, but I feel like envy comes with this, like, I want what they have. And that longing can really point us to unacknowledged desire. It's really interesting to notice when you have envy, because I think it's underneath the sort of the shadow side of that is really important information that we can use. Like, I want something, I have a desire for something that I don't have, and that's actually great. But the jealousy is slightly different. That's like, I'm afraid of losing what I have. And that's sort of that contraction, because I love that you said it's a contraction. I feel it that way too, is like arises out of scarcity, like our threat, right? That we're going to lose something. But I think comparison is kind of the thoughts that tie those together, sort of the thread that brings them together, because it's the habit, or how we sort of an unconscious habit, I think, if we have, of measuring our inner experience or our inner way of being against somebody else, and a lot of times against the show that somebody else is putting on, right? Because we never really know what's going on inside somebody else.
Yeah.
We can do a lot of comparison, when we're looking at people's social media, which we know isn't really who they are. But anyway, I don't know. What do you think about the difference between envy and jealousy? Is that how you see it too?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, if envy sort of arises when another person's gain feels like your loss. And I feel like jealousy is when something you believe secures your own place. It actually feels like that feels threatened because of somebody else. So where envy fears like not having, jealousy fears losing. I don't
Yeah.
know how
Yeah.
yeah.
That's kind of
Um,
how I see it too.
yeah, and yeah, comparison sort of creates this like ranking or this hierarchy that doesn't actually exist. It's something that we, for whatever reason, we have inside of our, our psyche. Um, but it becomes like an evaluation, I guess.
Or it's
And
like it's like external, we're looking for external validation. So we're
yeah,
trying to compare ourselves to where we think other people are. But I don't know,
yeah,
when we're more internally validated, comparison is doesn't really happen, If you're getting your sense of self from inside you
that's right.
instead of like looking at, somebody else's house or car or clothes or spouse or whatever it is, all the sort of metrics that we compare. We're just trying to check and make sure we're okay um, by comparing where we are with where other people are. And I think
Exactly.
that's always a losing game. Like I don't think you can win at that game.
Totally. And this is we've talked about our sovereignty, giving our power away on this podcast many times. And this is the perfect example of that when you really no aren't are no longer defining yourself from within, you start trying to figure out where you stand compared to everyone else around you. And really your body looks for safety in whether you feel that above or below everyone else, and you're like ranking yourself without knowing it. Um,
Mm,
and so again, it's like it's these subtle. We might be doing it and have no idea we're doing it. It's this subtle awareness of knowing ourselves on a deeper level that we can really get to the root of all of this, which is um, ultimately what we want to do. And like you said, we're consciously or unconsciously or subtly measuring, like, where do I stand? What do they have that I don't? What does this mean about me? And like you said, social media is the perfect trap for. I've noticed it's like maybe it's the 80/20 rule. There's like 80% of people on social media who literally can't, like, they look at what people are doing and they see it as a threat. Like, oh, they don't, if they're doing it, I can't do it.
mm,
There's not enough for everybody. And then there's 20% who look at it like an opportunity. Oh, if they're doing it, that's evidence that I can do it. It
yeah.
becomes more about inspiration. And that's, you know, I I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I'm in that 20% of like social media inspires me. It doesn't take away from me. I'm like, oh my God, look at
Yeah,
what
I feel
they're
the
doing.
same. I'm the same way in my professional life with the inspo and not and it's so funny because psychics are like notoriously territorial and can be in my experience. Of course, not
Yeah.
everybody, but that's I don't know. I think that that kind of comparison comes from like scarcity mindset, don't you? Like
Yeah.
if you're getting all these clients, then you're taking clients away from me, or if you're getting all this attention, you're taking attention away from me, and that it doesn't agree with the understanding of universal abundance that I have,
Yeah, it
which is
does.
more
It's
that,
like
we
universal
have
law.
this yeah, universal law, infinite amount. Um, and I'm like, well, there's 8 billion fairly miserable people on the planet at the moment. And I think there's clients or
Everybody.
whatever for all of us. There's not no lack.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to come at it from a point of lack,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, and the beauty of that, just to go a step deeper, is that there's 8 billion of us that are each one unique from the other. So there's not a single one of us that's expressing ourselves the same way as the next person
Yeah.
ever, period, stop, full stop. And
Right.
so we could be doing the same quote unquote modality, but it's going to be expressed differently,
Mhm.
because it's our own unique expression. So that's the beauty that we really need to learn how to embody that truth, that understanding, that universal law, um, and use it as evidence that The world is just mirroring our own success. Or
100%. And like if you see this in authors or people who want to write too, like sometimes will stop because they're like, what do I have to say that's different from anybody else? Or that's already been done,
yeah,
that's already been said. And like you said, we all nobody's going to say it or do it the way that you will. That
yeah,
uniqueness is your value. And when we go with that universal law of infinite abundance and the other universal, I don't know if this is a proper universal law, but if it's not, it should be that
it,
your uniqueness is the thing,
yeah,
right? Then but when we're sort of up in that upper, higher self viewpoint of things, then envy and jealousy seem like not they're not a thing. I just want to say hi, Jody. Hi, just so glad you're here, honey. But I think that the lower chakras, like the lower energy centers, are really driven by and I want to sort of loop in the conversation we had about the seven deadly sins because so fascinating. Before we started rolling today, Jane was talking about how she did some research on the seven deadlies, and it's so fascinating. So let's loop
yeah,
that in.
yeah, and yeah, it is super fascinating because I jealousy and envy brought me to like I wasn't raised Catholic. I wasn't raised in the church at all, but of course we all know the seven deadly sins, at least we think we know. And so I went into this like researching rabbit hole and to see where they came from. And I guess, this is what the internet told me, that they actually didn't start in the church to trying to control behavior, which is what I would have thought. But they began in the 4th century with desert monastics, people who were living in silence for years and study the mind, um, directly because, well, for whatever reason, because that's what monastics do. So um, there was specifically a monk named Evagrius Ponticus who noticed reoccurring mental disturbances that disrupted the inner stillness. And if we've ever meditated ourselves, we have experienced this personally. And they were like intrusive thought patterns that hijacked perception, and they were states that really distorted reality. So um, that's where they came from. These thoughts that kept coming up, uh, you know, that you know the monks would notice something subtle like anger would pass, fear would pass, desire would pass, but envy and jealousy would linger because envy, it's not an object, it's actually a self-definition, you know and it's like in the early writings, I guess they described as sorrows, the envy's sorrow at another's good.
Mm.
So, psychologically, that means their existence threatens my sense of being. And they felt this somatically in their body as they were sitting in silence and stillness. And it wasn't until later in the 6th century that Pope Gregory the Great, reorganized the list into what became the seven deadly sins. And this is fascinating too. The word deadly didn't actually mean punishable, it meant deadening, which means states that numb awareness and separate you from the truth.
Wow.
So I know it's fascinating. Originally, they weren't, um, they were more like predictable distortions of perception under psychological insecurity. That's what they say. So, like, not bad behavior, just misperception. And of course, as as I don't know, I've talked a lot about this. I've noticed that the church, especially the Catholic Church, seems to hijack a lot of this stuff into fear and control, and this is definitely one of them. But so, if we just look at it as like this was a contemplative practice and noticing that this was like direct perception of themselves, and and it's something, not to condemn or not to say that we're like bad people because of it. It's
Mm,
just um it's just like the clouds of perception. It's fascinating.
so fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating they found some that really, seemed harder to clear than the other ones, and I
Yeah.
think that, from what we do, the work that we do in the mystery school, if we translate this into shadow work, right? That because that's really like all the 7 deadly sins, and we looked them up. Greed, lust, sloth, wrath, envy, gluttony, pride. We had to look them up because
Yeah.
we
We had
couldn't
to
remember them all.
remind ourselves.
Um, we can look at that as sort of the basic sort of the backbone of shadow work, right? Kind of
Yeah.
the the shadows that live, especially in those lower 3 chakras, the survival chakras, that, the human the animal-y part of us, um, it can be really driven by those sort of instinctual emotions, sort of, survival emotions, shadow emotions, whatever we wanna call them, and I don't know, for me, it suppressing them never works. It's more about, acknowledging them, like, acknowledging them without acting on them if that's the best scenario. If we can do that, like, oh, I'm really jealous, I'm really envious, I'm really, angry, I'm really, full of greed, whatever it is, and um, and acknowledge that. When we acknowledge it, we avoid the jelly donut squeeze of then suppressing it and acting it out in a very subconscious way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
just to piggyback off that, it's like it's about the nervous system, and at probably back then, it was just really that feeling of safety. Where do I stand in my tribe? Am I safe? Do I belong? And now
Mm,
that's morphed into, our more modern world, but the ancient teachers weren't condemning any emotions, saying we don't either here. Um,
right.
but really, they were warning about what happens if you believe the story, because once comparison defines your reality, you stop living life, and you stop you living your own sovereign life, and you start looking at everyone else's. And when you're living in constant measurement, that actually is separation,
Mm,
which is sort of described as a spiritual death. That's the separation is suffering. It's the suffering that every human on the planet is experiencing. If you're feeling suffering, it's the separation from self, which is the separation from source.
it's so fascinating. I wonder if there's sort of a tribal aspect to this too,
Yeah.
because as humans, we started so tribal. We still are sort of fundamentally tribal, but it back in the day, when these desert meditators were meditating was in a more tribal period because when you're in a tribal situation or a societal structure, right, then your position inside of that is very important, right?
Yeah.
And part that position, the security, when you're talking about security, am I safe? It made me think about the security of position, right? And
Yeah.
if somebody has something you don't have, do they knock you off your position?
Yeah.
And then you really are not maybe safe, you know? So maybe there's some, um, I was thinking about like jealousy in sort of like love relationships or romance or marriage, and if somebody else comes along and steals if you're a woman in in the patriarchal pattern, if somebody steals your woman, your man, are you then you lost your position and maybe not safe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely about safety.
Yeah.
And that's like the root of all of it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I just want to, turn it to anybody who's listening. If you're listening live, if you guys have any thoughts or, you know, direct experience with this, let us know. And it's worth, talking about how to return to your own frequency after, into your to how to like, because let's say we're feeling this, what do we do? Um, and we really want to turn like our attention back into direct experience And this actually goes back to the monks, you know. We don't necessarily need affirmations. We're not convincing ourselves that it's not there, or that, you know, I'm better than who I'm comparing myself to. It's not. It's just come back to contact with your own life. Um, okay, what do I actually want? What feels alive in me right now? What is mine to move toward? When we do this, the other person stops being a mirror of lack and becomes either neutral or an experience of evidence that I can do it too. So I think, you know, again, bring it back inward over and over again. Because I
Yeah.
don't think we don't overcome jealousy by eliminating the difference. You know, the person's always going to have a Ferrari and you're not, you know, that's not going to change. But if you just like inhabit yourself more fully, I think over time jealousy dissolves when your relationship with yourself stabilizes.
I think so too, and it's kind of, and hi, Robin, my friend Rob, my dear friend Robin's here. Nice to see you here, honey. I think there's kind of like, for me, like a softening around those hard edges when I have a willingness to meet those feelings, like, "Oh, I'm feeling jealous, I'm feeling envious, I'm comparing myself right now." To kind of lean into that with a lot of softness and feel it as sort of a both and. So celebrating somebody, right? And feel a pang of longing at the same time, that those two can exist inside of me without canceling each other out. Like I am envious and happy for them. I'm noticing jealousy and I'm like curious about that. So the both and to me is what softens it and allows me to kind of exist in both places at once.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, when comparing, um, I don't think we get to the point where we don't do that. It's such a natural thing, but maybe we just sort of shorten the loop on it a little bit, catching ourselves faster when we're comparing and, coming back into our sovereignty, like getting back in our own lane, right? And that's when we can do, you know, um, hold both frames at once. I think that's for me what works.
Yeah. Yeah. And learning how to, again, like you said, meet these emotions without self-judgment. Um, like the emotion itself is just an emotion. It's a 90-second by physiological experience. We've been talking about this. But the suffering comes from resisting either the emotion itself, the feeling itself, or what it's revealing to you.
Mhm.
And so using it as an opportunity, okay, instead of suppressing it, what you can ask, like, what part of me feels threatened right now, you know? And maybe it's like touching on a desire you haven't been honest about, or a grief that you haven't acknowledged, or a fear of exclusion, or a place that you don't trust. For me, I think the biggest one, you're talking about writing a book. I've absolutely had that narrative of like, oh, it's already been said. There's like a gazillion books out there. Mine's not going to, be on the New York Times bestseller. Like, okay, so it won't, but it doesn't, none of that matters. Those are all just self-judgment that's freezing me into not creating, you know?
Yeah.
And I'll just throw it to Jody here, who says, and have worked on jealousy throughout my life, and it definitely feels like fear. Yep, we are just talking about that. And then her follow-up, and I'm currently strengthening my self-love and self-comparison and caring for my inner child, which feels like where the jealousy stems. Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it's 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 information. It's all these emotions are pointing us and telling us more about ourselves, you know? So, g when we get curious and we ask, "Okay, what do you have to say?" What do what
Yeah.
is this
I
telling
love it when
me?
I feel envy, actually. Jealousy's, like, a little harder for me. I don't really like that feeling, but I love it when I feel envy because 'cause I'm like, "Ooh, there's something I want," you know? And
Yeah.
what if you did a vision board if about everything you've envied other people had, you know? It'd
Yeah.
be an incredible, like, turnaround there for manifesting what you want, you know? And then maybe, like, working on allowing that, to come to you, working on the places where you feel like you don't deserve it or that you have, maybe not enough self-worth. You're not giving yourself enough self-worth to feel like you have it.
Yeah.
Um, that somebody else deserves it, but you don't. I think there's sort of a bottom line thing there for me anyway. So it
Mhm.
would be fun to do kind of like a homework assignment, which
Yes,
is the
for everybody.
envy, vision board, and see if you can sort of do the turnaround there and create those things for yourself that you envy in other people. That'd be pretty cool.
It'd be really cool, trusting the universal law of abundance. There's actually 7 laws of abundance, we can talk about this some other time, but definitely there's a universal law of there's enough for everybody. And so using like, trusting that that's true. I love the envy vision board. It's like, "Oh, yes, that would be let's do that. Let's" and then
Yeah.
you're working with that same nervous system that's locked up in fear. Um,
Mhm.
on the exact opposite of the fear is the thing you feel like that you really want, but you can't have, or the thing you're
Mm.
gonna lose if you let go of the fear. So with
Yeah.
that curiosity, what is it? What are we scared of that we're not gonna get or we can't do or, we're not smart enough or we're not pretty enough or whatever the thing is. What are we telling ourselves? What's on the other side of that?
Yeah, jealousy, I loved, Jody's point here about the jealousy in the inner child, and I can absolutely track back all of my jealousy issues as an adult to, like, when I was 3 and my sister was born, you know, and
Yeah.
my mom and dad's attention went off me and went on to my sister, and I remember feeling super jealous at 3
Yeah.
years old, and every time I feel jealousy now, I'm like 3 years old again. It's so clear to me, like, it's
Yeah.
right back to that, um, sort of child's experience, which is a totally valid experience, but the child's experience, the child's perception of, how much love there is to go around, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, "It's so painful, it's so tender," but if I can attend to my own self in that space, then the jealousy, like, I'm like, "That's what it is. Oh, I'm 3 again." Fair, totally fair, valid feelings, and that's not who I am now. That's not what I believe. That doesn't reflect the values that I have and the beliefs that I have now as an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It just becomes a story that we believe is true throughout the rest of our lives.
right,
And, bringing it back to like the contemplative traditions, which in the mystery school is like the backbone, right? Of our own spiritual practice is meditation and and really understanding that clarity is dependent on direct perception. So we're noticing how we're feeling. We're noticing sensations in our body. We're watching our breath. We're seeing what is actually here inside us. And comparison breaks that immediately. So the moment that the mind starts measuring, it actually stops experiencing, it starts evaluating, and it replaces it with some hierarchy. And that's just all a story. It's not real.
right.
So bringing it back to that clear, direct perception every time takes time. It takes practice for sure. But that's where sovereignty and freedom lie.
And that's what we do in the mystery school. If you want to know more about it, you can check out our website, the Quantum Mystic, quantum-mystic.com, and Jane and I lead a cohort every year, really using these spiritual practices, using shadow work, using an examination of ourself through all the mirrors that the world dishes us into expanding our consciousness. And, that's what we're really all about. So we hope you join us in the mystery school. learn more about it.
Yeah. And this is a great conversation. Linda's jumping on. We'll take a moment. I've never thought of myself as a jealous person, but are helping me to identify what envy is. Good. Yeah, there's subtle distinction, but it does feel differently in the body, right? When you're having that experience. Same with comparison. Um, it becomes a clear distinction of what we're feeling. So, here's the invitation to bring it back to direct experience and notice the sensations as opportunities in our own bodies. Um, thank you all for joining us. This was a great conversation, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank
Um,
you, Jane.
yeah, we'll see you next time.